The guest room smelled like lemon disinfectant and something faintly metallic, like old keys or a forgotten coin jar. She sat on the edge of the bed, back stiff, hands resting on a wool blanket that offered more insult than warmth. The door was locked from the outside, again. It had become routine now, though every time the latch clicked shut, a part of her flinched. She could hear muffled voices downstairs. Her son, his wife. Laughter floated up, casual and light, like she didn't exist. As though the woman who had raised him, fed him, nursed his fevers, paid for college, and held his hand through heartbreaks had suddenly turned invisible. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from illness, but from anger held too long without release. They said it was dementia, that she couldn't be trusted to cook, to go outside, to answer the phone. But the worst part wasn't the lies. It was how easily people believed them. The doctors, the neighbors, even her younger daughter, who once called her a lioness. Now, they all looked at her with that same tight smile, the kind people wear when they're about to hang a picture over a crack in the wall. Something is wrong, but we'll pretend it isn't. She rose slowly, the old wooden floor creaking beneath her bare feet. She pressed her ear against the door. Plates clinked. Her daughter-in-law's voice, high and sweet and slicing, said something about the paperwork. She felt her chest tighten. They always lowered their voices when it came to legal talk. Always when she was out of the room, when they thought she was too drowsy from the pills they gave her. She had stopped taking them 3 weeks ago, hid them under the mattress. Her mind had never been clearer. She shuffled to the window. It was bolted shut, another insult. The lawn outside was green, the kind of perfect green that looked artificial. She remembered planting daisies there, barefoot, laughing with her husband years ago. Now it was just grass, the kind of grass you lay people under when it's all over. The thought struck her like a slap. Was that what they wanted? To tuck her away before she had the chance to protest? Before she noticed the missing money, the changed locks, the whispering behind doors? She stepped back from the window and looked around the room. A single chair, a side table with a lamp. No clock, no calendar, nothing to anchor her to time or truth. That was by design, she knew now. Confusion breeds compliance, isolation fosters doubt. And once you doubt your own reality, they've won. But not this time. Her reflection in the window stared back, older, yes. Softer in places. But the fire in her eyes remained. They forgot who she was before they tried to turn her into a ghost. She wasn't going to disappear. Not now. Not when the truth still lived in her bones like muscle memory. She would wait. She would plan. She would make them remember. Long before the locks on doors and whispered accusations, her mornings began before the sun even considered rising. The kettle would whistle softly in the dim kitchen light, steam curling through the still air as she poured herself a single cup of instant coffee. No cream, no sugar, just something warm to hold while the rest of the house slept. In those quiet moments, she would glance out the window and feel, for a heartbeat, like she existed beyond the roles they needed her to fill. But the silence never lasted long. Within minutes, footsteps echoed upstairs, a child's cry pierced the calm, or the dishwasher clicked stubbornly mid-cycle, another demand, another thing to fix. She would set the cup down, half full, and begin the day. She was the thread that held the whole tapestry together, even when it frayed at every edge. Sick kids meant long nights beside their beds, whispering lullabies and wiping fevers with trembling hands that never wavered. Not once. There were doctor's appointments she juggled between shifts, science projects she stayed up late to glue together, school plays she clapped for from the back row because someone had to stand and record. They never noticed she was always standing. They never asked why she didn't sit. When money was tight, and it always was, she worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. Cashier by day, home baker by night. On weekends, she cleaned houses. Her own children didn't know what her dreams were, only that she packed their lunches with care and always remembered to cut the crusts the way they liked. She once wanted to be a teacher, or maybe open a flower shop, something small, simple, hers. But there was always something more urgent: rent, groceries, tuition, shoes that fit. Dreams shrank when survival took center stage. She didn't complain. It was love, and she gave it freely. Family meant everything to her. Holidays were a sacred ritual. She scrubbed the baseboards before guests arrived, cooked enough food to feed an army, and made sure everyone had a place to sit, even if she had to eat standing by the sink. Birthdays, anniversaries, funerals, surprise visits. Her door was always open. Cousins, in-laws, neighbors in crisis. She lent money without question, knowing it might never return. She covered rent for her niece after a messy divorce, paid her brother's utility bills during a rough patch, and quietly bought her mother-in-law new glasses when the old pair broke. They always said thank you, but never twice. And when her husband passed suddenly, an aneurysm, no warning, no time to say goodbye, she didn't fall apart. She couldn't. The mortgage still had to be paid, and the children still needed breakfast. She cried behind closed doors, cheeks pressed into his old flannel shirt, the scent of him fading like a photograph in the sun. But in front of the world, she stood tall. She was the one who held the family together through it all, not with grand speeches or endless lectures, but with presence. With quiet, stubborn devotion. Even in old age, her love didn't retire. She babysat her grandchildren without hesitation, despite aching knees and stiff hands. She baked their favorite cookies, showed up at their school recitals, took pride in each drawing they gave her, no matter how messy or abstract. She gave and gave until the well ran dry, and then she dug deeper. And now they call her confused, fragile, as if years of running this family had vanished the moment her hair turned silver. As if her forgetfulness with a phone charger one time meant she couldn't manage her own life. They forgot her story, or maybe they chose to forget it because it was easier that way. Easier to paint her as a burden than remember the countless burdens she carried for them. She sat in that locked room, and for a moment she could still taste the morning coffee she never finished, still hear the laughter of children around her dinner table. That was her legacy. Not dementia, not decline. She had built this family with her own 2 hands, brick by brick, moment by moment, love by exhausting love. They may have locked the door, but they could never erase the truth. It started with a soft knock on her bedroom door one morning. Her son stood there, smiling too brightly, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. Behind him, his wife hovered with a purse clutched tightly in her arms, as if she were bracing herself for a storm. They said they were going out for breakfast. A treat. Just the 3 of them. She hadn't been out in weeks, and the thought of fresh air and hot coffee gave her something warm to hold on to. She dressed quickly, even added a touch of lipstick, and followed them without question. But it wasn't a cafe they drove to. It was a clinic, the kind with frosted glass windows, pale gray walls, and clipboards that weighed more than they should. She asked questions, but no one answered clearly. Her son kept saying, "Just a quick checkup, Mom. Nothing serious. You've seemed off lately." And his wife nodded like a puppet on cue. Inside the office, the doctor barely looked at her. Most of the conversation happened around her, not with her. They asked her to recall a list of words, do some hand motions, draw a clock. She hesitated on the clock. The hands looked strange in her mind, but everything else came out fine. Or so she thought. Still, when they left, she could feel something shifting, something irreversible. A week later, a manila envelope arrived. Legal documents, cold, impersonal ink. She was being declared legally incompetent. Her son was now her legal guardian. Her finances, her medical decisions, her home, all placed under his control. Power of attorney was stripped without her consent. No warning, no discussion, just a signature. Just like that, her autonomy dissolved. The locks changed next. Her bedroom became the guest room, and the guest room became hers. They didn't say it outright, but the message was clear. This is where you belong now. Out of sight, out of the way. Her calendar was removed from the wall. Her phone mysteriously stopped working. They began sorting her mail before she ever saw it. Bills, letters, bank statements, all filtered. Her bank card was taken for safekeeping. Her favorite chair in the living room slowly migrated to the attic. It was all so subtle, so carefully orchestrated, that if she mentioned it, she was labeled paranoid. "You're just tired," they'd say. Or worse, "Do you even remember?" Then came the final blow. Late one night, while retrieving a blanket from the linen closet, she overheard them in the study. The door was ajar. Her son's voice, low and firm, said, "We've updated the will. She doesn't need to know. It's safer this way. Cleaner." Her name, her future, erased from a document she had once drafted with trembling hands, back when she still believed in family as her safety net. That single overheard sentence turned her stomach into stone. She retreated. Quietly, the blanket clutched to her chest, her heart thudding like a gavel. She didn't confront them. Not yet. The betrayal was so deep, it took days for her to find the bottom of it. She walked the halls like a ghost, rehearsing memories as if they were evidence. Because now, they were. The time she co-signed on his first car loan. The mortgage she helped pay off when he lost his job. The tuition checks she wrote without hesitation. All of it meant nothing now. They saw her not as a woman, not even as their mother, but as a liability. A signature they needed, a silence they required. The heartbreak was paralyzing at first. She'd sit in the guest room for hours, staring at her hands, wondering if maybe she had forgotten something important. Maybe she was slipping. That's how gaslighting worked, little cracks filled with poison until the whole structure began to rot. But then something strange began to stir beneath the grief. A flicker, not rage, not yet, but something sharper than shock. A slow burning clarity. They underestimated her. They always had. She remembered details. She still had copies, hidden away, of documents they thought lost. Her mind was not broken. It was injured, maybe, but not gone. They thought they had taken everything, but they forgot the most dangerous thing of all, her will. Not the legal one, the one in her gut, in her spine, in her blood. She would not let this be her ending. She would not let lies become her legacy. If they thought she would go quietly, they had forgotten who she was before they learned to walk. The phone sat on the nightstand like a relic from another life. She checked it every morning out of habit, though no new messages ever waited for her. At first, she'd called old friends, trying to keep a lifeline open. But her calls often went straight to voicemail, and when they didn't, there was always an awkward silence on the other end. Some responded with short, clipped politeness. "Oh, I heard you weren't doing well. I thought you'd moved. Your son said you were resting." Resting. As if she were recovering from something. That didn't exist. One by one, the voices that had once filled her life drifted away. They didn't question the narrative. They accepted it, maybe even preferred it. No one wants to confront betrayal wrapped in family ties. It makes people uncomfortable. So they disappeared. The house, once bursting with noise and movement, had grown quiet in a way that didn't just feel still. It felt abandoned. Her son passed her in the hallway without meeting her eyes. He always looked busy now, perpetually tapping his phone, always in a rush to get somewhere she wasn't going. When he did communicate, it was through short, formal text messages. "Appointment confirmed for Thursday. Your new meds are ready. We'll adjust the schedule next week." Each word landed like a sterile slap. Not a single, "How are you feeling?" Not a, "Do you need anything?" The man she once cradled through nightmares now spoke, to her like a nurse checking on a stranger. His wife had stopped speaking altogether. She avoided the guest room entirely, as though proximity might contaminate her with imagined madness. No one came for tea anymore. No one dropped by with fresh bread or invitations to Sunday brunch. Birthdays, once marked by flowers and family dinners, passed in silence. On her last birthday, she sat on the edge of the guest room bed and whispered, "Happy birthday" to herself. No card, no cake, not even a passing acknowledgement. The ache in her chest wasn't just from being forgotten, it was from being rewritten, reshaped into someone she didn't recognize. Anniversaries were no better. Her wedding anniversary came and went like a ghost, drifting through the calendar without a single soul remembering. She sat that night with her husband's photo on her lap, tracing the lines of his smile, wondering what he would have done if he'd lived to see this. Would he have believed her? Fought for her? Or would he too have been convinced by the orchestrated performance around her? The coldness of the house was no longer just a matter of thermostat settings. It seeped into the walls, the air, her skin. The rooms felt emptier now, as if even the furniture had grown tired of pretending. Everything was fine. The dining table, once the centerpiece of family celebration, stood untouched, cloaked in dust and silence. Her voice echoed when she spoke aloud, the only one left to hear it. Sometimes, late at night, she would walk the halls just to remind herself that she still existed, that her feet still touched the floor, that she hadn't become a ghost. And then there was the photo on the mantel. A snapshot of another time, her husband holding the baby that would one day become her jailer, her daughter-in-law smiling with false warmth, her standing proud in the center, hands resting on their shoulders. It had once made her smile. Now, she couldn't look at it without her stomach turning. It remained where it had always been, untouched, its once clear glass now veiled in a fine layer of dust. Shadows gathered around it, as if even the light had lost interest in the past. No, one dusted it, no one moved it. The faces in the frame watched over a family that no longer existed, not really. A family that had rewritten the story and buried the author. She learned not to cry too often. It made her feel weaker than she was. She needed clarity now, not grief. She journaled in secret, writing down everything she could remember. Names, dates, conversations, the patterns of neglect. It was a way to keep her thoughts sharp, her story intact. If no one else was willing to remember who she really was, she would do it herself. Loneliness, she discovered, didn't just mean being alone. It meant being invisible in the presence of others, being erased in plain sight. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't broken. But she was alone, more alone than she had ever imagined possible. And yet, in that loneliness, the flicker of determination began to harden into something more powerful. They thought isolation would make her disappear. But isolation gave her time. And with time, she could build something back, even if she had to do it brick by silent brick. It was a dull Thursday afternoon when she finally decided to clean out the tall dresser tucked into the far corner of the guest room. It had been her husband's once, and though she hadn't opened its bottom drawers in years, she needed something to do. Something to fight the growing fog of silence and erasure that thickened around her day by day. The wood creaked as she tugged at the handle, dust lifting into the air like ash. Inside were old envelopes, yellowed papers, and a small leather-bound book tied with a cracked elastic band. She almost didn't notice it, buried beneath tax forms and a wrinkled map of a road trip they never took. But the moment her fingers brushed against the cover, something stirred. The spine had his name etched faintly inside. It was his diary. She hadn't known he kept one. Her heart pounded as she sat down, fingers trembling more from emotion than age. The first few pages were mundane. Notes about home repairs, the weather, frustrations with politics. But deeper in, the entries grew. More intimate, love letters written in secret, lines describing her laugh, little moments from their marriage preserved like pressed flowers. Her eyes burned, her breath caught. This man had adored her beyond measure. And then she saw it. An entry dated, just a year before his death. Talk to Reynolds again. Finalize the clause. No matter what happens, her portion is untouchable. Ironclad. Not even the kids can change that, not without her written consent. She'll be protected. It's what she deserves, she blinked, reading it again. Untouchable. Her breath left her chest. Her son had changed the will. They had declared her incompetent. But they hadn't known about this. They hadn't known her husband had built a legal wall around her inheritance. A final act of love from a man who must have suspected, even then, the way things could turn. Hope cracked open inside her like sunlight through old curtains. She spent the next 2 hours tearing through drawers, files, every cabinet in the guest room. At last, tucked inside a faded blue folder, she found it. A photocopy of the original will. And there it was, Clause 14. Her right to her inheritance, frozen in ink, protected unless she herself consented otherwise, which she never had. But she couldn't move forward alone. She needed someone who could help her navigate this mess. Carefully, cautiously, she slipped into her shoes and walked the block and a half to the payphone near the old gas station. It was a risk. Her son monitored her calls, but he never thought she'd use the dusty relic on the corner. Her fingers dialed slowly, muscles remembering numbers long forgotten. She called Mr. Hallworth. Reynolds had passed, but Hallworth had been their family lawyer for years, now retired. She didn't know if he'd still be alive, much less willing to help. But when he answered, his voice was exactly as she remembered, warm, curious, skeptical. At first, he didn't believe it. "You're calling from a payphone? Are you sure you're okay?" he asked gently. "I'm not okay," she replied, voice firm. "But I'm not crazy, and I need you to come see something." He arrived the next afternoon, a cane in one hand and an eyebrow raised in disbelief. She handed him the diary. Then the will. Then she told him everything. He listened without interrupting, just like he always had, and when she was done, he set the papers down and exhaled slowly. "My God," he murmured. "They really did this to you?" She nodded once. "I always told your husband that." "Clause was unnecessary," he said, shaking his head. "I'm glad he didn't listen." It was the first time in months that someone had truly seen her, not as a patient, not as a fragile old woman, but as herself. As someone wronged, someone ready to fight back. The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet action. Hallworth took copies of every document. He explained next steps carefully, avoiding legal jargon. He believed in her. Not because of sentiment, but because of fact. She had the evidence. She had her mind. And more than anything, she had something they didn't expect: clarity. With every meeting, every moment spent with her husband's words and her old friend's quiet support, the fog began to lift. She slept better, ate better, spoke more firmly. Her hands still shook sometimes, but not from fear anymore, from the weight of all she was about to reclaim. Grief hadn't left her. Her husband's absence still echoed in every corner of the house, but something else lived there now too. Something steadier than rage, quieter than despair. Resolve. They thought they had buried her under shame and silence, but she had one thing left: truth. And now it had a voice. She didn't scream, she didn't threaten, she didn't rage through the halls demanding justice or pounding fists against locked doors. That wasn't her style. She had spent decades solving chaos with calm. This time would be no different. The world around her might have forgotten who she was, but she hadn't. With her husband's diary clutched like a lifeline and Clause 14 echoing in her mind, she began to craft her plan with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime managing other people's emergencies. Only now, the emergency was her own. She started by researching the law late at night, using the old tablet they had forgotten to lock. It was slow and glitchy, but it worked well enough. She read quietly under a lamp, scribbling notes into a little notebook she kept hidden in the lining of a drawer. Guardianship laws, power of attorney disputes, inheritance protection statutes, all of it foreign language at first, but she began to understand. She learned the importance of competence, hearings, how to request independent medical evaluations, how to file motions pro se without a lawyer. She may have been isolated, but she wasn't helpless. By the time Halworth returned a week later, she had a folder thick with evidence, records, letters, statements, photocopies of legal forms ready to be filed. He read through them slowly, face unreadable. When he finally looked up, there was a glint in his eye that hadn't been there before. "You've done your homework," he said. "I'm not waiting around for someone to save me," she replied, folding her hands. "I'm here to save myself." Still, she needed more legal muscle. Halworth made a few calls and introduced her to Maya, a mid-career lawyer with a sharp mind and a quiet fire behind her eyes. Maya didn't patronize. She listened, truly listened. And when she offered suggestions, she didn't override. She collaborated. "You're the client," she said with a shrug. "I follow your lead." It was the first professional conversation. In months where no one questioned her mental state, no one softened their words out of pity. Together, they began to draft filings. The first motion was for a reassessment of her competency, supported by her physician's evaluation from 2 years ago, her spotless financial records, and signed letters from 2 neighbors willing to attest to her daily routines. Then came the motion to revoke the power of attorney due to abuse of fiduciary trust. Every document was worded with precision and signed with unshaking hands. They filed them without fanfare. No press, no family confrontation, just a quiet appearance at the courthouse and a polite acknowledgement at the clerk's desk. But legal battles weren't her only concern. Financial survival was just as crucial. Her son had siphoned control of most accounts, but he wasn't as clever as he believed. She had one remaining fund, a modest investment account her husband had opened years ago in both their names. He had forgotten to include it in the updated paperwork. It remained untouched, like a tiny island in a sea of manipulation. She withdrew just enough to hire Maya and move assets to a separate trust, one under her full control. Next came the will. She didn't rewrite it out of spite, though the temptation lingered. She rewrote it because the one on file no longer reflected truth. She chose her beneficiaries carefully, a niece who had always called to check on her, a local literacy foundation she used to volunteer with, and, in a final poetic twist, a fund for elderly women fighting guardianship abuse. This time, she ensured the process was bulletproof. 2 neutral witnesses, a notary present, every page signed, dated, sealed. She made copies and stored them in 3 separate locations, one with Maya, one with a secure digital vault, and one mailed to Halworth. She did all this without alerting her son or daughter-in-law. They still believed she was docile, defeated, drifting, and she let them believe that. She smiled gently when they brought her tea, nodded slowly during their condescending updates. She even feigned confusion once or twice, letting them grow, careless with their assumptions. Every move she made was under the radar, beneath the noise, and every step brought her closer to the version of herself they thought they'd erased. Her victory wouldn't come with headlines or applause. That wasn't the goal. This was personal, sacred, a reclamation, not a spectacle. She didn't need to raise her voice to win. She just needed to be heard by the right people, in the right places, at the right time. And soon, very soon, she would be. ChatGPT said, the Yasa courtroom was smaller than she imagined. Not the grand arena of television dramas, but a modest room with beige walls, dull carpet, and buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. Still, to her, it felt monumental. This was where it would all be laid bare. The lies, the silence, the theft of her life. She sat at the petitioner's table, spine straight, hands folded gently on the table before her. On the other side sat her son and his wife, both in stiff suits that didn't suit them, trying to look composed. But their eyes darted, their lips twitched, and their posture betrayed what they wouldn't say aloud. They hadn't expected this. The judge entered. A woman middle-aged, stern but not unkind, and the proceedings began. Her lawyer, Maya, spoke first. Calmly, precisely. She outlined the abuse of power, the medical misrepresentations, the financial mishandling. Then came the evidence. The old will with Clause 14, her husband's diary, bank statements, recordings, of phone conversations she had quietly saved when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Neighbors testified that she walked every morning, paid bills on time, baked for church raffles. Her doctor sent a sworn affidavit that she showed no signs of dementia. And then it was her turn to speak. She stood slowly, walked to the center of the room without help. No cane, no stutter. Just the woman she had always been, stripped of pretense, fortified by truth. She looked at the judge, not her son, not the audience, just the one person in the room whose belief mattered now. "My name is Margaret Elise Langley," she began. "I am 72 years old. I raised 3 children, cared for a husband through illness, worked 2 jobs most of my life, and managed a household budget down to the penny. I have a good memory. I know who I am. I know what day it is. I know what was done to me." Her voice never cracked, though emotion lived behind every word. She described the morning they took her to the clinic under false pretenses, how they slowly locked her out of her own life, gaslit her into questioning reality, rewrote legal documents, without transparency, and manipulated the people around her into believing she was fading. "But I wasn't fading," she said. "I was grieving. I was mourning my husband, and they turned that vulnerability into an opportunity." She didn't yell. She didn't weep. She spoke like a mother who had taught lessons her whole life and wasn't about to stop now. By the end of her testimony, the courtroom was silent. Even her son, red-faced and squirming, didn't interrupt. His wife clutched his arm like a lifeline, eyes wide with disbelief. They had expected her to fall apart, to forget, to mumble and misplace her thoughts. They didn't know that she had rehearsed every sentence in front of the mirror, not to perform, but to reclaim. This wasn't revenge for her. This was resurrection. The judge adjourned briefly. When she returned, her words came slow and clear. "The court finds insufficient evidence of diminished capacity. The petitioner is deemed legally competent. Power of attorney is hereby revoked. All prior estate modifications made under guardianship authority are declared void. The original will stands. Control of all personal and financial decisions returns to the petitioner immediately." Margaret didn't cry. Not then, not in front of them. She simply closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, a breath that seemed to pull her back into her body. She had been absent for so long, floating in a haze of doubt and dismissal. Now she was grounded, present, whole. She approached her son quietly. He didn't stand. He couldn't. He stared at the floor, mouth slightly open, as though he still couldn't believe she had done it, that she had outmaneuvered him, that the woman he'd tried to silence had spoken louder than a courtroom's gavel. She placed the signed court order on the table in front of him. "Keep a copy," she said, voice gentle but unwavering. "You'll need it the next time you try to lie about who I am." His eyes darted up, shame and fury battling across his face. She saw him, really saw him, not as her baby boy, but as a man who had made choices. And now he would live with the consequences. She turned and walked out of the courtroom. Each step was a farewell, not just to the trial, but to the powerless version of herself they'd tried to entomb. She didn't look back. There was no need. She had taken everything back, not through vengeance, but through truth. And truth, it turned out, was the most dangerous thing they had underestimated. The phone rang constantly in the days following the court decision. Her old phone number, once hauntingly quiet, now lit up with desperate frequency, unknown numbers, blocked IDs, familiar ones too. The same son who used to message her like a medical liability now sent paragraphs of apology through text, voice, and voicemail. His words trembled with panic. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said in one. "Can we talk? Please, just call me back." In another, his voice cracked. "We were trying to help you. We thought it was the best thing. We didn't know what we were doing." His wife sent short, clumsy messages too. "I hope you're okay. This was all a big misunderstanding. Maybe we can visit?" She read each one in silence, played the voicemails once, then again, not because she was tempted to answer, but because it mattered to hear them squirm, to listen to the once sure voices shake beneath the weight of their own undoing. She never responded, not once. She sat with her tea on the back porch, letting the sun warm her skin, the same way it had years ago when life was simpler, quieter, more honest. And when the phone rang again, she simply turned the volume down. She didn't need to yell, to scold, or to retaliate. The court had spoken. The documents were sealed. Her name was cleared. Her assets returned. Her will legally reinforced. Their actions, their coordinated lies and cold manipulations, were now public record. And in the small town where they lived, that kind of truth had a way of traveling far faster than gossip ever could. The community that once smiled politely at her son now met him with narrowed eyes. His law firm quietly dropped him from a few sensitive cases. A board position he held at the local hospital expired without renewal. At PTA meetings and fundraisers, whispers replaced welcomes. Even his closest friends stopped inviting him to Sunday barbecues. They didn't want to be associated with someone who stole their mother's voice and tried to call it love. His wife fared no better. Her carefully curated social media persona, the picture-perfect mother, wellness blogger, charity volunteer, began to unravel under subtle but growing scrutiny. A few anonymous comments under her posts, then public ones. "Didn't you try to put your mother-in-law in a legal cage?" someone wrote under a photo of her holding a self-help book. She disabled comments soon after, then deleted entire accounts. Her brand partnerships went silent. The public wanted inspiration, not scandal. She had overplayed her performance, and now the curtain had dropped. Margaret, meanwhile, went about her life with quiet grace. She didn't broadcast her victory. She didn't tell neighbors or friends what had happened unless they asked. And even then, she told only enough to explain the facts. The rest, she let them imagine. She focused on reclaiming her routines, morning walks with the sun on her back, coffee with a friend she hadn't spoken to in years, dusty cookbooks cracked, open to make things just for herself. She planted new flowers in the garden, the same soil her husband once tended with his bare hands. She laughed more, slept better, ate slowly. Everything now belonged to her again. Especially time, and in that time, she healed. She framed a copy of the court order and tucked it behind a painting in her study, not out of vanity, but as a private monument. A reminder that truth had a shape and that she had given it form with nothing but resilience and facts. She left the family photo on the mantel, dusted now, still untouched in arrangement. But where once she had looked at it with grief, now she saw it with detachment, a chapter, not the whole story. Her son sent a letter eventually, a real one, on paper, apologizing, blaming stress, miscommunication, the fear of losing her, begging for a second chance. She read it once, folded it slowly, placed it in the drawer beneath her socks. Not because she forgave him, not yet, but because holding on to rage felt like giving him too much power. She didn't need revenge, she needed space, and in that space, she had found peace. They kept calling, of course. Holidays came, messages piled up. "We're thinking of you. We miss you." The kids ask about Grandma, but she never replied, not because she couldn't, because she chose not to. Some bridges once burned should remain ash. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was simply free. The locks on her doors were her own now. Her money, her choices, her silence. And in that silence, there was finally dignity. She didn't pick up the phone. She didn't need to. She stood at the kitchen sink one morning, rinsing berries under the stream of cool water, and for the first time in what felt like years, she wasn't rushing. There was no one tapping a watch or calling her confused or telling her to go sit down. The house, now fully hers again, buzzed with small signs of life. Fresh flowers in a vase on the table, the quiet purr of a cat she had adopted from the sea, shelter and sunlight warming the floor through clean, unshuttered windows. She paused for a moment, watching the water drip from her fingers, and heard something she hadn't in a long time. Her own inner voice. Clear, calm, no longer buried, beneath shame or fear. For so long, she had been told she was a burden, something to manage, someone to hide, and for a while, she had believed it. But now, she knew better. She saw the truth in the way she'd defended herself in court, in the pages of her husband's diary that still lived beside her bed, in the quiet dignity with which she had reclaimed her life. That strength wasn't new. It had always been there. It was the same strength that held her steady through childbirth, through grief, through working multiple jobs without ever dropping a single plate at the dinner table. It was the same resilience that kept her household running when money was tight, when emotions ran high, when everyone else leaned on her without ever asking how she held up. They had called her forgetful, fragile, fading. But she remembered everything, especially now. The pain hadn't vanished. Betrayal leaves its fingerprints on the soul, but it no longer defined her. She carried it the way old trees carry, knots in their trunks, visible but not broken. She still thought about her son sometimes, not with hate, not even anger. Just a kind of distant sorrow, like remembering someone who died a long time ago. She didn't wish him harm, but she didn't miss him either. Some relationships don't deserve resurrection. Instead, she focused on what remained, and what bloomed. She joined a book club at the local library. Met two women her age who loved gardening and laughter and stories about what husbands never notice. They weren't best friends overnight, but they understood her rhythm. Didn't ask too many questions, didn't pity her. They just saw her as she was now, a woman with stories and wit and a spine that had never really bent. She started painting again, something she hadn't done since her 30s. Her strokes were rusty at first, hesitant. But soon, her hands remembered the way they remembered everything else. Sunsets, flowers, memories. She painted them all, not for display, just for herself. On weekends she baked, tried new recipes, burned a few, laughed to herself when she did. Her home began to feel alive, not because it was full of people, but because it was finally full of her. She walked into town often, stopped by the florist she used to visit with her husband, picked up a single bloom for the kitchen each week. She said hello to familiar faces, even those who now looked at her with shame or regret for ever believing the worst. She didn't hold grudges, but she didn't extend herself beyond her peace either. Her boundaries were stronger now, not walls, just well-tended fences, the kind that keep the garden safe. She thought often about what worth really meant. For so long, she'd measured it through their eyes, her children's approval, her neighbors' praise, society's quiet expectation that older women should shrink until they disappear. But she had survived shrinking. She had survived silence. And in doing so, she had learned something no one could take from her. Her worth was never in how much she gave. It was in who she was when no one was watching. When she walked past the mirror now, she didn't flinch. She saw silver hair, laugh lines, and eyes that had seen too much and were better for it. She saw a woman who had lived through fire and came out steel. A woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, and nearly erased, and still stood. On her front porch, as dusk settled and the world turned soft and pink, she rocked gently in her chair and listened to the sounds of the neighborhood, not with longing, but with contentment. She no longer needed anyone's permission to feel whole. She no longer needed to be needed. She was free, and it hadn't come through kindness or comfort or the warmth of family. It had come through battle, through standing in the fire, refusing to vanish. And now that she had emerged, there was no going back. Maybe she wasn't the burden after all. Maybe she was the proof that some fights, no matter how painful, are worth everything. The morning was quiet, but not in the way it used to be. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of neglect. This was different. This was peace, a kind of hush that felt earned, intentional. The air smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee, her favorite blend brewing in the pot she dusted off just for herself. The table was set simply, a white plate, silver cutlery, a cloth napkin folded with care. Across from her, the other seat remained empty, but for the first time, it didn't feel like something was missing. It felt like space. Space she had, carved out, defended, and reclaimed. Sunlight poured in through the sheer curtains, painting the room in soft gold. It touched the table, the worn floorboards, the edges of the framed photos she hadn't removed, not out of sentiment, but because they no longer held power over her. They were frozen moments, no longer weighted with hope or grief, just images. The past, framed and left in place. She stirred her oatmeal, added the honey she liked, not the one her son used to insist was better for her. She sat, straight-backed, calm, whole. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a celebration. And it was. The meal itself wasn't grand, just oats, fruit, and hot coffee. But the moment was sacred. This table had once held every version of her. The young mother juggling babies and bills, the grieving widow trying to stay composed for everyone else's sake, the silenced elder watching her world shrink. And now? It held only the version that mattered most, the woman who had taken herself back. She glanced toward the seat across from her. Once, she would have filled it without question, invited her son, offered forgiveness before it was earned, played peacemaker, bridge builder, martyr, but not anymore. That chair was empty because she chose not to fill it. And in that choice was power. She'd received another letter the day before, handwritten again, her son trying one last time, words about healing, about family, about time lost. She had read it with steady eyes, folded it once, and placed it in a drawer with the others. She felt no hatred, no desire for revenge, just clarity. Some stories didn't need sequels, some wounds were better left closed. She didn't need more apologies. She needed air. And she finally had it. Outside the window, the world continued. A dog barked. A child laughed in the distance. Life moved on, and so did she. She reached for her coffee, brought it to her lips, and let the warmth seep through her bones. There was no music playing, no phone buzzing with messages, no voices interrupting her thoughts. Just the sound of a woman living on her own terms. For so long, she had believed freedom would feel lonely, that silence would sting, that having no one to eat with would echo like failure. But that was a lie. One taught to women like her from the moment they were old enough to pour a second cup of tea. The truth was simpler, quieter, and far more beautiful. She had herself, her mind, her voice, her table, and that was enough. The sunlight shifted, warming her hands as she reached for the last bite. She smiled to herself, not a big, performative grin, just the small, contented curve of a mouth that finally had nothing to prove. This was her home, her rules, her peace. She stood slowly, took her empty plate to the sink, and rinsed it with the same care she used to show others, now redirected inward. She wiped the table clean, folded the napkin again, and placed it neatly. For tomorrow, because there would be a tomorrow, and she would meet it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through everything else. Before leaving the room, she looked back once more at the table, just one plate, just one chair, but everything she needed. This time, she ate at her table, alone and free. Optional voiceover. They say family is everything, but sometimes you've got to choose yourself, especially when they never did.